Hello once again. Nice to be here with you. Before we start up the topic for today, I would like us to look at a particular question. And that question is, what happens if we lose our natural resources? What do you think will happen if we lose our natural resources? Now, natural resources are a lot of things. Back then, when we were much kids, they used to tell us that natural resources has to do with things that occur mostly. You see them in terms of plants, you see them in terms of animals. For instance, we have the egg, the dairy products we get from poultry, and so many other things. Even mineral resources are referred to as natural resources. It simply means that these natural resources are things that are useful to man. And since they are actually useful to man, they also contribute to making life comfortable and okay. And imagine if these natural resources are depleted or they are no longer in existence. Imagine what will happen. There are so many chaos, or so much will happen to mankind and also happen to the ecological system. Imagine if there are no more food to eat. Imagine if there are no more resources like the fuel to drive our engines, our machines. Imagine the kind of chaos, and in fact, to be sincere, we'll be going back to the Stone Age. And even at the Stone Age, they require several natural resources for their own comfort and existence. The truth of the matter is this: man cannot separate himself from his natural resources. We depend so much on these natural resources for our existence. Now, today we are going to actually be discussing something very important concerning these natural resources. And the topic today is conservation of natural resources. Conservation of natural resources. Now, in this particular topic, we're going to explore a whole lot of things. And because of the size of this particular discussion or the particular topic, we will actually be breaking it down into some sections. Now, first of all, the first section, we are going to be looking at the meaning of natural resources. We're also going to be talking about the types of natural resources. We will be looking at conservation of natural resources, or what is the meaning of conservation of natural resources. And also we will be talking about reasons for conservation. What are the reasons for conservation? And we will look at the methods that are involved in conserving some natural resources. We're actually going to be talking about some natural resources and look at the methods we will employ as to conserve these natural resources. Now, under this particular topic, we will be looking at some specific objective. Now, the specific objective is actually things you are able to know at the end of this particular topic. Now, number one on the list is that at the end of this class, you should be able to define what natural resources are. Number two, you should be able also to mention and define the types of natural resources. And number three, you should be able to tell also to define conservation, the term conservation of natural resources, and also state some of the importance or reasons why we should be conserving these natural resources. And then finally, you should be able to mention some of the methods or state some of the methods that are being adopted in order to conserve these natural resources. Now, if you are actually set, let's begin with the definition of what natural resources are. Now, natural resources, as the term implies, resources actually has to do with materials that are useful and beneficial to man. That's what we call resources. So anything that is beneficial, anything that is useful to man is actually referred to as resources. Now, if we include the term natural, it simply means that these are materials that occur naturally and they are useful to man and also beneficial to man. So it means that they can be obtained. When we say natural in quote, it means it can be obtained from both living and non-living sources. Living and non-living sources. And now when we're talking about the living sources or things, we're actually implying both plants and animals. And then when we're talking about the non-living sources or things, we're actually looking at things like the soil, we're looking at water, we're looking at air to an extent. We're also talking about the soil, actually. That's the non-living sources. So we will be looking at these natural resources and also how to conserve them. Now, let's take a look at, I've just mentioned some natural resources that are living and some that are non-living. Now, this brings us to what we call types of natural resources. Now, basically, there are two types of natural resources. We have renewable natural resources, and then we also have the non-renewable natural resources. These are the two basic types of natural resources. Now let's take a look at what renewable natural resources actually are. Now, what are renewable natural resources? Renewable natural resources are actually resources that can be easily recovered when used up or exhausted. So if you have finished using up these natural resources, if you can get them easily, if it doesn't take a long period of time before they can be recovered again, it simply means that type of natural resources is renewable. An example of renewable natural resources, we have air or wind. You can't actually per se, you can exhaust air. You can't exhaust air. And it can, even if it is not enough in a particular area, it can be replaced easily. Then we also talk about another example as water. Water is also another example of a renewable natural resources. We have soil, we have plants, and we have also animals. They can be easily recovered when exhausted, The next one is non-renewable natural resources. Now, these are actually natural resources that cannot be easily recovered, the opposite of what renewable natural resources are. They cannot be easily recovered when used up or when exhausted. So you can't easily recover them. An example is crude oil. Crude oil cannot, in fact, crude oil takes millions of years or thousands of years before it can be formed. It is actually formed from dead remains of plants and animals that have stayed deep in the soil or in water for over a long period of time. It has been there over a long period of time. So if they are being exhausted or used up, it takes a longer time for them to be recovered or replenished again. So these can also be classified as examples of non-renewable natural resources. Other examples of non-renewable natural resources includes coal. Also, we have something precious stones like gold. We have copper. We have other mineral resources like tin. We also have natural gas, nuclear energy. These are examples of non-renewable natural resources. Now, having understood what are the two types of natural resources, which is the renewable and non-renewable natural resources, what then is conservation? What is conservation? Now, conservation simply means to use effectively. That's what the word conservation is. Or you can say it is judicious use of a thing. So if we say conservation of natural resources, we can define it as the judicious use of natural resources in order to ensure their continuous availability. To ensure their continuous availability. Remember when we started, we said that natural, what happens, what do you think will happen if natural resources are no longer there, if they are not there? How will it be effective in man? And I told you that it will be so much disastrous. In fact, the effect will be so huge negatively on man, because man seriously depends on these natural resources for their survival. We depend on it for our survival. And so we should ensure that there is a continuous availability of these natural resources. So the ensuring of continuous availability of natural resources is simply what we refer to as conservation of natural resources. One more time, it is the judicious use of natural resources in order to ensure their continuous availability. Now, it involves conservation involves the preservation of natural resources from loss, from waste, and also from exploitation. That's why we said judicious use. So they are not lost. So they are not wasted and they are not exploited, because in fact, to be sincere, a lot of persons are actually exploiting and wasting so many of these natural resources. And so hence the need for conservation of natural resources. So in order to prevent wastage and exploitation, conservation of natural resources should be in place. Now, why do we conserve? Apart from these other things I have told you about, apart from preventing it from being lost, apart from preventing it from also being wasted and exploited, apart from ensuring their continuous availability, these are some of the reasons why we conserve natural resources. Now let's take a look at some other reasons why natural resources should be conserved. One of the reasons why natural resources should be conserved is to prevent extinction. To prevent extinction of rare and valuable species of plants and animals. There are several valuable species of plants and animals that, in fact, their continuous availability should be ensured. Their continuous availability should be ensured. And when these animals, when these plants, which we can call endangered species, are no longer available, it leads to what we call extinction. So where they cease to be found, cease to exist, extinct. So one of the ways or reasons why we conserve natural resources is to prevent extinction of these endangered species. Next is, number 2, is for the provision of food and medicine. For the provision of food and medicine. Remember, I told you that man cannot live without natural resources. Now, imagine man living without food and also living without medicine. It means that the death rate will be so high. Okay, so one of the reasons why we conserve natural resources is for the availability, to ensure the availability of food or the provision of food, and as well as medicine. And some of the natural resources that helps us get these, or that serve as sources of food and medicine, includes the forest and wildlife. And when we're talking about wildlife, it includes both plants and animals, while the forest just talks about plants. So we get medicine from plants and even food from plants. We also get food from wildlife. So one of the reasons why we conserve natural resources is for the provision of food and medicine. Number 3 is that it provides the basis for research purposes. Now, most scientists, based on the availability of wildlife and several forest reserve areas that those areas have actually created a basis for them to carry out several researches, scientific researches. In fact, most of the things we have learned scientifically, even biologically, came from these researches. So one of the reasons for ensuring the conservation of these natural resources is that these natural resources, they provide a base for we to learn more, to carry out more researches in various areas. And then number 4 is to promote recycling of scarce mineral resources. Promote recycling. Remember, another term name for recycling means to reuse. To reuse. It promotes using again most of these natural resources. For instance, if water is polluted, where after being used up, it can be used again. It can be used again through the process of treatment, which is also a form of recycling. A form of recycling. So we can recycle most of these scarce mineral resources instead of just dumping them, losing them, or wasting them, or over exploiting them. So one of the reasons for conservation is to promote recycling of scarce mineral resources. Now, quickly, we are going to be looking at some natural resources that should be conserved, or that we will be considering to be conserved. Now, all natural resources should be conserved, but because of the number, okay, the number of natural resources that needs to be conserved, we are just going to narrow our discussion for today to these 6 natural resources that should be conserved. Now, they include air, we have soil, we have water, we have wildlife, we have forest, and then mineral resources. So we're going to be looking at the methods of conserving these natural resources. Very important you note the methods for conserving these natural resources. Now, apart from education, to also help our ecosystem, our ecological system, one needs to be educated on these areas. And also in relation to your education, in preparation for your JAM and all that, this thing, these are key areas you should take note, methods of conserving some natural resources. Now let's take a look at some of them. Now the first one we will be considering is wildlife. Remember, I told you that wildlife has to, in fact, it covers every area that deals with animals that are found in the forest, most not animals that are domestic, but animals found in the forest, and also plants that are also found in the forest. Now, how do we conserve these wildlife? Now, one of the best ways to conserve natural resources, if I may say, is education. One of the best ways to conserve natural resources, any type of natural resources, is through education. Educating people of the benefits and actually the dangers of not conserving natural resources. Enlightening them of the benefits of conserving natural resources. You know, most persons are so ignorant of this, and because of this ignorance, they end up affecting the ecosystem and invariably affecting themselves in the long run. So one of the major methods of conserving any natural resources, even including wildlife, is educating the public. Number 2 is establishment of game or forest reserves. Establishment of game reserves, establishment of forest reserves, establishment of zoological gardens. Now, these are actually areas that are being carved out or set aside where wildlife, mostly animals, are allowed to live naturally without being affected by any external issues or any external persons, mostly by hunting, mostly by poaching and all that. No. Establishment of game reserves. Most persons see these game reserves as tourist centers where they go and learn more. They learn more about most of these wildlife. So establishment of game reserves, forest reserves, and zoological gardens. In Nigeria here, we have some game reserves. I do wish you go visit most of these places, and you will be glad you did. Now, the second one is control of hunting to prevent extinction. Control of hunting to prevent extinction. Fine and true, most of this wildlife are used as food. We eat most of this wildlife, like the animals. We use them as meat and so on. Even the plants, we also use them as food. But it must be controlled. It must be based on legal grounds. It means that the government should set up policies or legislations that should control or regulate hunting in these areas. It's not that people shouldn't eat meat. We're not saying that people shouldn't get sources of proteins and all the others. No, it must be controlled. It must be controlled. Number 3 is poaching. Now, hunting should be controlled, but poaching should be stopped, should be prohibited. Now, poaching simply means illegal hunting. And most times these people hunt these animals for games, for sports. Okay? They just hunt and take parts of their bodies or parts of the bodies of these animals and sell. Like you have the elephant tusk that is very valuable. Most persons sell it and make huge profit. Some take the skin of these animals. These come through poaching, which is illegal hunting, through poaching. Now, poaching should be prohibited. You see the reason why I said that education is actually important. Poaching should be prohibited. I know most persons make serious money from poaching, but it does not actually help the ecosystem, and it doesn't actually help us as individuals at large. So poaching should be prohibited. Number 4 method, like I've said before, has to do with educating the public. Another natural resources that should be conserved is air. Air. Now, how do we affect air? Air is all around us, okay? But once anything you do brings about air pollution or brings about pollution of the atmosphere, it really affects. Imagine you inhaling polluted air. Okay? Imagine you inhaling air that is filled with smoke. Remember, if you check some of our videos, we looked at some of the effects of air pollution. And one of the effects of air pollution, we said it causes respiratory diseases. Okay? It causes so much this that it stimulates so many things. It brings about ozone layer depletion. It brings about global warming. It brings about greenhouse effect. It causes acid rain and so many of these. Now, what are the methods that should be employed in order to conserve air? One is proper burning of waste so as to prevent smoke, soot from polluting the air. And one of the ways we can effectively carry out these burning of waste is burning them in incinerators. Burning them in incinerators. Now, when they are burnt in incinerators, the emissions, the gaseous emissions from these burnt waste are usually not harmful. Okay, they are not harmful, but they are friendly to the atmosphere. They are not much of smoke or carbon dioxide being discharged into the atmosphere. Number 2 ways we can control air pollution is also educating the public. Educating the public. Now, you move around the street, you discover some persons, they just come out in the open and then start burning things. They start burning things. These practices are very wrong. Now, if these people are actually aware of the effects or what they are actually doing to the atmosphere and to themselves at large, they will it will help turn around their actions and most of these practices. Okay, so educating the public is also one of the ways, like I said before, one of the most important ways to ensure conservation of any natural resources. Number 3 is prevention of effluents from factories, which may pollute the atmosphere and also cause acid rain. Remember, I've told you about acid rain. Most of these emissions, from factories, they contain nitrogen oxide, and when they go to the atmosphere, they come back, or they are condensed as rain, and they fall down as what we call acid rain. So a prevention of most of these gaseous emissions from factories can also help in controlling or in conserving the air. Number 4 on this again, okay, let's quickly move. That's 3. We have also methods of conserving water. We are also looking at water as one of the natural resources that should be conserved. One of them is damming of rivers to allow for more efficient management of water. Damming of rivers. Now, damming is actually building several structures in order to hold great amount of water, which can be used for several purposes. Very soon we're going to be looking in subsequent classes or videos, we're going to be talking about some of the benefits of carrying out this process of damming. Okay, for time's sake, let me just mention one. One has to do with the hydroelectric power. Like for instance, in Nigeria here, we have the Kainji Dam. Okay, it is one of the benefits we actually derive or enjoy from what? Conserving water through the process of what? Damming. It helps in the supply of electricity. We call that hydroelectric power. So damming is one of the ways we can conserve water. Number 2 ways we can conserve water is by storing it in storage tanks. Okay, putting them or keeping them in storage tanks. Yes, of course. So if I store water or keep water in storage tanks, it becomes useful for you some other time or in the nearest future. You use them in the nearest future for tomorrow. Okay, so one of the ways we can also help to conserve water is by storage of this water in tanks as well as wells. Number 3 is turning off taps immediately after use. Remember, we said that one of the purpose of reasons for conservation is to ensure continuous availability. Imagine someone going to the tap after using water from the tap and leaves the tap running. Of course, if the water is coming out from a storage tank, with time, if that tap is not turned off, with time, the water will be used up, and you can't use it again unless you put water into the storage tank. So one of the ways we can also help to conserve water in several containers or in several storage structures or facilities is by turning off tap immediately after use. And then also number 4 is treatment and recycling of used water. Now this has to do with the treatment of water. Now you go to developed countries, after they finish making use of water, that same water is being channeled through tunnels and it goes back to the factory for treatment and is sent again back to the public to use. Now that is an effective system. Now that talks about recycling of used water. So used water can be recycled and sent back again, clean and pure and healthy to take. Okay, so recycling of water should be encouraged. It should be encouraged. In fact, the government should set up factories. Okay, it should build factories and also ensure that recycling of used water should be in place in our community. The next thing we are going to be looking at, or another natural resources we're going to be looking at, is the soil, how to conserve the soil. One of the ways we can conserve soil is prevention of overgrazing. prevention of overgrazing. Now, overgrazing has to do with sending a process by which animals, mostly ruminant animals, in large number, clear out vegetations on land. And we will be discussing about overgrazing in subsequent topics or videos we're going to be making. And one of the ways we can also prevent soil being depleted, or actually the soil being wasted, okay, or overexploited, is actually the prevention of overgrazing. Prevention of overgrazing. Another way we can method of conserving the soil is prevention of bush burning. Now, in most of these developing countries, and mostly in Africa, most persons clear vegetations. One of the easiest way to clear vegetations is the use of fire, okay, by setting the bushes or the vegetations on fire. Even farming practices, if most farmers that have a large area of land, instead of using mechanized issues or probably using machines to clear the place, or employing laborers, men that can cultivate or clear that particular place, they prefer the use of, or the method of bush burning, which is a very poor farming practice, a poor farming practice. Now, the reason for employing or adopting bush burning as a farming practice or agricultural practice is actually because it is cheap, okay? It is actually cheap to embark on. So, but prevention of bush burning is also a way of conserving our soil, all right? There are several negative effects of bush burning, and we'll be talking about in subsequent videos. Number 3 method of actually conserving the forest is prevention of deforestation. Now, what is actually deforestation? It is the indiscriminate felling down of trees. Indiscriminate felling down of trees. In other words, you are actually affecting the forest. Remember, we talked about the forest, and we said that the forest is also a natural resource that should be conserved. So prevention of indiscriminate cutting down of these trees is an effective way we can actually control control or conserve the soil. Why? Now, trees, they actually serve as windbreakers. They are also one of the ways we can prevent soil erosion. So in other words, if you are actually removing the trees, you are exposing the soil to erosion and also to leaching. So one of the ways we can prevent this is one of the ways to prevent the soil erosion is to also prevent deforestation. Another one again is adoption of better farming practices. Adoption of better farming practices. In fact, one of the best farming practices to adopt is called crop rotation. Crop rotation. We're going to also be looking at what crop rotation is in videos that are coming up later. And then also methods of conserving forest. How do we conserve the forest? I told you that the forest is actually, in fact, it covers all that has to do with trees and plants that are found there, okay, in the wildlife. Now, one of the ways we can conserve the forest is encouraging afforestation. Now, what is afforestation? It simply means planting of trees. It has to do, in fact, it involves the planting of trees. Involves the planting of trees. It's actually the opposite of deforestation. Okay, planting of trees. By planting of trees, we are increasing the forest size or capacity. And then number 2 way we can also conserve the forest is establishment of forest reserve. Establishment of forest reserve. Remember, I told you there are some forests that can be set aside by the government or so, set aside to be, in fact, where people don't go to do anything. Indiscriminate felling down of trees is not allowed. It is just kept there to, for research purposes, kept there for other benefits. People can go there to learn a whole lot of things about the forest, about several species of plants. And then also we have prevention of bush burning. Of course, bush burning helps to reduce forest capacity, helps to reduce the number of forests we have or number of plants in the forest. And then also one important way we can ensure conservation of the forest is educating the public. And then also finally, we're going to be looking at methods of conserving mineral resources. One of the effective methods of conserving mineral resources is adoption of effective and efficient extraction methods of mining mineral resources. So in other words, what we're saying is that effective methods and efficient methods should be adopted when mining mineral resources, And then number two is discourage overdependence on a particular mineral resources. Now, there are several countries that are actually over-depending on a particular mineral resources. In some countries, they over-depend on crude oil or their oil resources, which is actually not good. Over-dependence of these natural resources doesn't encourage judicious use of that natural resources. With time, those natural resources will no longer be available for use. They will no longer be available for use. And then number three, which is the last one, is effective and efficient use of available mineral resources. Now, after mining these mineral resources, ensure that they are effectively used, ensure that they are efficiently used, and also ensure that they are economically used. These are some of the ways we can conserve some natural resources. And before I go, I would like us to take a look at some few questions using the ExamGuide app. Let's pick just very few questions. We have four questions we can look at. Now, look at the first one. They said conservation of wildlife is necessary mainly because, A, is it because many people derive pleasure from observing wildlife animals? 2, is it that many predator wild animals help in control of pests? 3, or C, is it wild species cannot resist disease better than their domesticated species? And D says it helps to prevent extinction of species. They said conservation of wildlife is necessarily, the correct answer is D, D, which means it helps to prevent extinction. It helps to prevent extinction of species of animals and also plants. Number 2 says forest conservation includes the following except. Forest conservation, we've just talked about forest conservation. It includes the following except. A says extensive felling of forest trees. B said selective exploitation of forest trees. C said replacing of harvested trees by planting seedlings. And D says prevention of bush fires. Now, the correct answer to this question, of course, is A, extensive felling. That is indiscriminate felling of forest trees. It is never a way of conserving the forest. And then question 3 says, which of the following is not a means of conservation? Not a means of conservation. A, replacing harvested mature trees with seedlings. B, controlling excessive deforestation. And C says burning of vegetation before cropping. And D says prevention of poaching. The correct option, which of the following is not a means of conservation, is what? C. So C is not a means of conservation. Burning of vegetation. Remember, one of the things we said is to prevent bush burning. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.